Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources on a topic, really dig in, and pull out the essentials for you.
And today we're tackling a really big one, a Japanese concept that's gone global, promising purpose, Ikigai.
Right, Ikigai. So our mission here is to get past the usual sound bites.
Exactly. We want to separate that popular Western, take the checklist version from what it means more deeply, culturally, psychologically.
Because it sounds like it's maybe a bit messier and maybe more interesting than the internet version suggests.
Oh, definitely more interesting. You'll see.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. The word itself, Ikigai. It's written Ikigai.
Yeah, and the literal translation is something like a reason for being.
So if we break it down, Iki, that's life or alive.
Life, alive, yeah. And kai, which often becomes gai in the compound word, means effect, result, value.
So what makes life worth living? Simple as that.
Deceptively simple, maybe, but that broadness is important. Even the Japanese government describes it quite widely
Awesome.
as basically anything that brings value and joy to life. Could be friends, could be hobbies, focusing on your kids, work. It's very open.
And when it first sort of hit the global scene, how was it framed? I remember seeing books about it.
Right. Authors like Garcia and Morales talked about it as the happiness of always being busy.
Always busy. Okay.
Yeah, they compared it a bit to logotherapy. Viktor Frankl's idea about finding meaning.
Sure, finding meaning even through suffering.
Exactly. But they suggested Ikigai goes a step further. It's not just about meaning, but about active engagement in life, finding things that really pull you in.
Okay, so that broadness, that openness, maybe that's why people wanted something more concrete.
I think that's exactly it. It led to this search for a clear, actionable tool. And that brings us right to the famous diagram.
Ah, yes, the Venn diagram. If you've looked up Ikigai online, you've definitely seen it. 4 overlapping circles.
It's everywhere, and it's incredibly catchy, right? It takes this big, potentially fuzzy idea and gives you 4 boxes to tick.
So what are the 4 domains in that popular model?
Okay, so the diagram says Ikigai is smack in the middle, where these 4 things overlap. 1, what you love, what you like doing.
Okay.
2, what you're good at, your skills.
Makes sense.
3, what the world needs, some kind of contribution.
Right.
And 4, what you can be paid for or rewarded for, your career, basically.
The sweet spot where passion, mission, vocation, and profession supposedly meet.
That's the idea. Nail all 4, and boom, you found your Ikigai.
But here's where our sources throw a curveball, right?
Here's the big twist. Your source material is really clear on this. That incredibly popular, widely shared Venn diagram, it did not originate in Japan.
Wait, seriously, the main thing defining Ikigai for millions globally isn't Japanese?
It's essentially a Western framework applied to the concept. Sources point to it being popularized by Mark Wynn, who was inspired by an earlier purpose diagram from Andrei Zuzunaga.
Huh. So it's a globalized interpretation.
Exactly. And notice what's really central in that diagram, career and economics. That 4th circle, what you can be rewarded for, that element is much less emphasized in the original Japanese understanding.
But hang on, if the diagram works for people, if it helps them think about purpose, does it matter if it's not authentic? Is it really misleading or just a useful tool?
That's a great question. Utility versus origin. Your sources lean towards calling it catchy but misleading.
Misleading how?
Well, by framing Ikigai as this perfect overlap, especially with the financial element being so key, it can become an unrealistic ideal.
Ah, so chasing that perfect center point could actually cause stress instead of fulfillment.
Precisely. The pressure to make all 4 circles line up perfectly might work against the actual feeling Ikigai is supposed to represent in its original context.
Okay, so we need to shift gears.
Yeah.
Move away from the external checklist.
Right.
And dive into the internal, the Japanese psychological perspective.
Hmm.
This is where the real concept lives, maybe?
This is where it gets much deeper, yes. When Japanese psychologists discuss Ikigai, it's far less about those external validations.
So what is it about?
Psychologist Michiko Kumano, for instance, talks about it as a sense of fulfillment, accomplishment that comes when people pursue things spontaneously and undertaken willingly.
Spontaneous and willing. That seems key. It means it has to be voluntary, right?
Yeah.
Driven by you, not by obligation or just needing a paycheck.
Exactly. It's personal. It wells up from inside.
Okay.
And Katsuya Nue, another researcher, offers a more technical breakdown. He says Ikigai has two parts.
Two parts.
First, there are the sources or objects of Ikigai. These are the things that bring meaning to your life. Could be hobbies, relationships, work, nature, whatever.
Well, what?
The what, exactly. But second, there's the actual feeling, the feeling that your life has value or meaning because those sources exist.
So it's not just having the sources, it's the internal emotional state they create, that feeling of worth.
That's the core of it. It's that intrinsic sense that life is meaningful because of these connections or activities.
That feels very different from the four circles.
Very different. And this is where Inui's work takes another really interesting, maybe even shocking turn. He classifies Ikigai based on its social dimension.
Social dimension. Okay, like how it relates to others?
Sort of. He identifies social Ikigai first. These are activities generally accepted and valued by society. Think volunteering, contributing to the community.
Okay, that fits the positive image. What else?
Then there's non-social Ikigai. This isn't directly tied to societal interaction. It could be things like religious faith, personal discipline, maybe deep engagement with art or nature for its own sake.
All right, still sounds pretty positive, or at least neutral. What's the last one? You said shocking.
Well, here it is. The third category is antisocial Ikigai.
Antisocial. What does that even mean in this context? Purpose. That's bad.
According to this classification, yes. It refers to motivation that comes from, well, darker places. Basic drives fueled by negative emotions.
Like what?
Things like a powerful desire to hate someone or something. Or even the drive for revenge.
Wow. Okay. That completely flips the script. So Ikigai isn't necessarily about being happy or good.
From this purely psychological viewpoint, it seems purpose is just the engine, the motivation itself. It's detached from morality. It's whatever raw force gets you up in the morning, makes you feel life has intensity, even if society would judge the source as negative or destructive.
That's profound and unsettling. It makes the concept much more complex, much more maybe human, reflecting the full spectrum.
It definitely moves it far away from the simple, feel-good commercial version. It forces you to think about what motivation really is.
It really does. It makes you reconsider historical figures or even people you know, what kind of Ikigai drives them.
Exactly. It frames purpose as a mechanism. Now, connecting this back, Ikigai isn't just a recent pop psychology fad either. It has academic history.
Right. You mentioned it was popularized academically.
Yes, by a Japanese psychiatrist, Miyako Kamiya, back in 1966. She wrote a book called On the Meaning of Life, where Ikigai was a central theme.
1966. So it has deep roots in Japanese thought about meaning, and have ideas about it changed over time within Japan.
Oh, absolutely. Society changes, and so do the sources of meaning. Anthropologist Chikako Ozawa de Silva found a really interesting generational difference.
Wow.
For the older generation she studied, Ikigai was often tied to fitting in, to the standard mold of company and family. It was more collective, about fulfilling expected roles.
So their purpose was found in duty, in contribution to the group, the company, the family structure, almost like their resumes, you said.
That's a good way to put it. Very much about social contribution within established norms. But the younger generation, total different perspective.
What do they report?
Their Ikigai was much more about dreams of what they might become in the future. It shifted towards individual potential, personal aspirations, finding their own path.
Wow, that's a huge shift. From collective duty to individual dreams. That reflects broader global changes too, I suppose.
It certainly seems to.
Now let's talk about the most famous association. Longevity. You can't really discuss Ikigai without someone mentioning Okinawa.
True. It's become almost synonymous, partly thanks to Dan Buettner's work on blue zones, places with exceptional longevity. He pointed to Ikigai as a potential factor in Okinawa.
What was the connection he made? Why would having a purpose help Okinawans live longer?
Well, one observation was that many Okinawans don't have the same strong desire to retire in the Western sense.
Meaning they just keep working.
Not necessarily just any work, but they often continue with their favorite jobs or deeply involving activities for as long as they're physically able. There isn't that sharp cutoff. The purpose continues.
So continued engagement, continued sense of purpose.
Exactly. And Buettner also highlighted something else crucial, moai.
Moai, what's that?
It's a traditional Okinawan practice. Basically, a close-knit group of friends, a social support network, often formed in childhood, that lasts throughout life.
So strong social bond.
Vital social bonds. This group provides emotional, social, sometimes even financial support. It's another powerful source of meaning, connection, and a reason to keep going. It underlines that Ikigai isn't always solitary. It's often deeply social.
That makes sense. Purpose and community intertwined. Now, you mentioned health connections earlier. Let's get into the science a bit more. What do the studies actually show?
This is where it gets fascinatingly specific. The sources indicate a clear link between lacking Ikigai and certain health problems.
Which one?
Specifically, cardiovascular diseases. People who report not feeling a sense of Ikigai appear to be statistically more likely to suffer from heart issues, circulatory problems.
So a lack of purpose could literally be, well, bad for your heart. It's not just a metaphor.
The data suggests a real physiological connection there, but interestingly, there was a limit noted in the sources. Yes. While the connection to cardiovascular health was present, the study cited found no significant correlation between a lack of Ikigai and the development of malignant tumors, like cancer.
That's specific. So purpose impacts heart health, but maybe not cancer risk in the same way.
It suggests the mind-body connection through purpose might have quite specific pathways, focusing perhaps on stress regulation, lifestyle factors affecting the heart, that sort of thing. It's not a magic bullet against all diseases.
Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around this journey. We started with this neat, tidy four-circle diagram.
The checklist for purpose and profit.
Right. And we've ended up somewhere much more complex, deeply internal, psychological, based on spontaneous, willing engagement.
And acknowledging that the source could be anything from community work to, well, even darker antisocial motivations, depending on the framework you use.
It really dismantles this simple self-help narrative.
I think the biggest takeaway, looking across all these sources, is that Ikigai, in its deeper sense, isn't really a transaction. It's not about achieving overlapping circles to get a reward.
It's more fundamental than that.
It's more like the raw engine, the motivation, the feeling of value that defines why you engage with life, regardless of whether society applauds or even understands the source of that feeling. It's defined from the inside out.
That internal validation versus external achievement, that feels like the core difference.
I think so.
So we started this deep dive looking for a universal key to purpose, but we found a concept rooted in a specific culture, Japan, with its own strong social dynamics, like that older generation's Ikigai tied to company and family.
Right, the collective expectation.
And then we saw the shift to the younger generation's focus on individual dreams. So here's the thought to leave you, the listener, with. Given that contrast between purpose defined by fitting a collective mold versus purpose defined by chasing individual future potential, how much does the very nature of what you consider your own Ikigai, your own reason for being, reflect or even define the broader generational quest for meaning in your own time and culture?
That's a deep one, something to definitely reflect on as you figure out what truly makes life feel worthwhile for you.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll explore another topic next time. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking, well, a necessary and pretty challenging look at apartheid in South Africa. We're aiming to unpack how a modern nation managed to construct really one of the most systematic, comprehensive examples of institutional discrimination the world has ever seen.
It's a period of history defined by intentional legal cruelty. It really is. Apartheid, of course, it's an Afrikaans word. It literally translates to separateness or, aparthood. It was the official state policy of institutionalized racial segregation and white minoritarian rule, formally implemented from 1948 right up until the early 1990s. And it also extended into Southwest Africa, which is modern-day Namibia, of course.
Right. And our mission today, it isn't just about reviewing the dates, is it? It's more about pulling apart the legal mechanics, the nuts and bolts of the system. We want to understand how they actually built it, how it functioned in the daily lives of millions, and, well, the incredible domestic pressure and international forces that were needed to finally tear it down.
Yeah, exactly. And to really grasp the magnitude, you almost have to recognize the twin pillars of the system. You had petty apartheid, which that focused on separating public life, the signs on park benches, separate toilets, segregation on buses, beaches, that sort of thing.
The everyday stuff, the visible separation.
Precisely. But the real structural violence, the deeper system, was grand apartheid. That's what dictated where you could live, where you could work, and even whether you held citizenship, all strictly based on your classified race.
And right from the start, The state established this formal, rigid hierarchy. It determined everything. White citizens, they were at the top, holding pretty much all the political and economic power. Then came groups classified as Indians and coloreds, and then right at the very bottom, the majority black African population. And that hierarchy, it wasn't accidental, was it? It was the foundation of the government's entire operational strategy.
Oh, absolutely. It was fundamental. And that strategy really kicked off in earnest with the 1948 election. The National Party, the HNP, they won on a specific promise to formalize the existing segregation. This was fueled largely by white anxieties over the rapid growth of black urbanization during World War II. They saw systematized segregation as, frankly, the only way they thought they could maintain white political and economic control.
And the name most associated with actually building that legislative framework is Hendrik Verwoerd, right? Often called the architect of apartheid.
Yeah.
But what always strikes me is the incredible bureaucratic efficiency of it all. This wasn't just random discrimination. It was codified law, meticulously planned.
Exactly. It was chillingly systematic. The foundational laws came thick and fast. First, they criminalized connection, personal relationships. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act in 49 and the Immorality Amendment Act in 1950 outlawed interracial marriage and sexual relations. But the absolute key to the whole structure was defining who is who in the first place.
Which brings us to the Population Registration Act of 1950. That must have been the bureaucratic cornerstone that defined everyone's future, wouldn't you say?
It absolutely was. It was chillingly efficient, as you said. This single act classified every single person in South Africa. Everyone was put into one of four main racial groups: black, white, colored, or Indian. And this classification, it wasn't just some administrative tick box exercise. It was destiny. It dictated your residence, your job prospects, your access to education, your political rights, which for most people meant basically no rights at all. The government poured immense resources into simply policing race, into deciding who fit where.
Right. So once race was legally defined, the next step for the government had to be separating people geographically.
Yeah.
To actually implement grand apartheid. And that mechanism, that was the Group Areas Act, also passed in 1950, wasn't it?
That's the crux of it, yes. The Group Areas Act. It effectively ended mixed settlements and strictly dictated where people could live based purely on the race assigned to them. This single law, you see, provided the legal justification for the forced removals of millions of people later on. It laid the groundwork.
And if you were classified as black and needed to, say, move for work or even just exist in an urban area, your movement was totally governed by the pass laws.
The pass laws, yes. They were centralized and significantly tightened under the Native Laws Amendment Act of 1952. Black people, specifically black men initially, but later women too, had to carry these identity documents at all times. They were often called the dampas. It's a powerful Afrikaans term meaning something like the stupid pass or the accursed pass. Yeah. If you were caught without it, or crucially, if you were found in an urban area for more than 72 hours without the correct stamp or permit in that passbook, well, you faced immediate arrest. Fines, prison, or forcible deportation to a designated rural homeland, even if you'd never lived there. It was a constant, daily instrument of humiliation and control. Its purpose was to ensure black workers were only present where their labor was needed by the white economy, and, crucially, not a moment longer.
When you start looking at the human cost of that whole legislative regime, the scale is just staggering. Between 1960 and 1983 alone, something like 3.5 million black Africans were forcibly removed from their homes, forcibly relocated. That number itself, it makes it one of the largest mass evictions in modern history, doesn't it?
It really does, and you see the brutal intent so clearly in specific actions. Take Sophiatown, for example. Sophiatown was this vibrant, culturally rich, multiracial township near Johannesburg. Crucially, it was one of the few places black people could actually own land freehold. The government saw it as a threat, a black spot, so they completely destroyed it, removed around 60,000 residents by force, and then, on the ruins, they built a new white suburb called Triumph, which literally means triumph.
Triumph. Wow, talk about adding insult to injury. Literally erasing black property ownership and culture to build a monument to white victory.
Precisely. And these relocations weren't just pushing people to the outskirts of cities, they were intrinsically tied to this wider system of Bantustans or homelands.
Right, the homeland system. Explain that a bit more.
Yes. This is where I think the true absurdity and cruelty of grand apartheid really becomes visible. The government designated just 13% of South Africa's land, typically the least arable, most impoverished areas for these black homelands. They created 10 entities, each supposedly for a specific ethnic group. Then they went a step further and declared 4 of these Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda, and Ciskei, the so-called TBVC states, as nominally independent countries.
Independent, but recognized by whom?
Well, only by South Africa itself and perhaps a couple of other pariah states at the time. No major international recognition. But here's the shocking detail. Any black South African deemed to belong to one of these Bantustans, especially the independent ones, automatically lost their South African citizenship.
So wait, a person born in Johannesburg, maybe their family had lived there for generations. Suddenly they're redefined as a foreigner in their own country.
Exactly that. They became, in the eyes of South African law, foreign migrant laborers. They needed a passport and a work permit just to cross back into white South Africa, the 87% of the country, to seek employment, usually in the mines or factories or white homes. This was absolutely devastating. It didn't just strip them of political rights, it fundamentally decimated any chance of accumulating generational wealth, because land ownership outside these impoverished homelands was impossible. This economic structuring, you see, is absolutely key to understanding the deep inequality that persists even today.
And the initial process of classification, deciding who belonged to which race group, that was often completely arbitrary, wasn't it? Especially for people categorized as colored, those of mixed descent. I remember hearing about these bizarre tests they used.
Oh, the bureaucracy resorted to truly shocking, pseudoscientific, and utterly humiliating measures. They look at things like language, who you associated with, but also crude physical appearance checks. The most infamous, absolutely, was the pencil test.
The pencil test, how did that work?
If officials were unsure about someone's racial identity, particularly if they suspected mixed heritage that might push someone into the wrong category from their perspective, they would literally stick a pencil into the person's hair. The person would be asked to shake their head. If the pencil stuck in the hair, they were deemed black or sometimes colored. If it fell out easily, they might be classified as white or perhaps colored. It sounds unbelievable, but it happened. We have documented records of families being ripped apart because siblings were arbitrarily assigned to different race groups based on things like this. And that meant they lived under entirely different sets of laws, couldn't live together, couldn't even socialize together legally in many cases.
The cruelty is unimaginable. So while grand apartheid was tearing up communities and assigning destinies based on pencils, the daily grind, the humiliations of petty apartheid, just continued relentlessly, enforced by laws like the Reservation of Separate Amenities Act of 1953.
That's right. That's the segregation you could see everywhere, every day. Separate entrances for buildings, separate queues in the post office, separate park benches, separate beaches, even separate ambulances. And that last one often had fatal consequences, meaning black patients received drastically inferior, delayed, or sometimes non-existent emergency health care.
And this disparity wasn't just circumstantial, it was baked into the funding, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in education.
Absolutely formalized. Under the Bantu education system, designed specifically to provide black children with an education deemed suitable for their station as laborers, the state spent vastly different amounts. The figures varied slightly year to year, but consistently the state spent around 10 times more per child on white education than it did on black education. So you see, inequality wasn't an unfortunate side effect of the policy. It was the express design of the system. It was meant to keep people separate and unequal.
Given that level of systematic, deeply institutionalized oppression, resistance was obviously inevitable. Let's maybe shift our focus now to the fight back, both the internal resistance within South Africa and the growing international pressure, because this is where the momentum eventually started to turn against the regime.
Yes, and the domestic opposition, it was consistently met with brutal, often lethal force by the state. The 1960 Sharpeville massacre stands out as a major turning point. Police opened fire on unarmed protesters demonstrating against the hated passbooks. They killed 69 people. This event shocked the world, but domestically, its immediate consequence was the banning of the 2 main black political organizations, the African National Congress, ANC, and the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAS.
And that banning forced a major strategic shift, particularly for the ANC.
It did. Facing complete suppression of peaceful protests, the ANC leadership, including Nelson Mandela, decided they had no choice but to abandon their long-held policy of nonviolence. They formed an armed wing, Mkhonto Wesizwe, often known as MK, meaning Spear of the Nation, to carry out acts of sabotage against state infrastructure.
And then fast forward 16 years to 1976, and we see this huge explosion of youth anger in the Soweto uprising.
That's right. Soweto, 1976. This uprising was sparked specifically by students protesting a government decree that Afrikaans, seen very much as the language of the oppressor, must be used alongside English as the medium of instruction in their secondary schools. What started as a peaceful protest march was met with police bullets. Though the initial official death toll was reported as 23, subsequent estimates suggest that over the following weeks and months of unrest, as many as 700 people, mostly young students, were killed.
700.
Yeah.
Just devastating.
It galvanized a new generation. And this period also saw the rise of the Black consciousness movement, powerfully articulated by Steve Biko. Biko promoted psychological liberation, self-reliance, Black pride, urging Black people to shed the sense of inferiority imposed by apartheid. His influence was immense, especially among the youth. But then, tragically, he was arrested and killed while in police detention in 1977. His death sent further shockwaves around the world and became another potent symbol of the regime's brutality, further galvanizing the global anti-apartheid movement.
So, while the government is violently suppressing resistance inside the country, international pressure is slowly but surely starting to close in, creating, as you said, a kind of surprising leverage point.
It was slow, frustratingly slow for those suffering under the system, but it did build. The UN had been condemning apartheid since way back in 1952, but tangible action was harder to achieve, often blocked by Cold War politics or economic interests. But after Sharpeville, things did escalate somewhat. South Africa was pressured into withdrawing from the Commonwealth in 1961 because other member states, particularly newly independent African and Asian nations, vehemently opposed its racial policies.
But actual sanctions took longer.
Yes, comprehensive, mandatory economic sanctions were debated for decades, but consistently vetoed by key Western powers in the UN Security Council. However, a significant step was taken in 1977 following the Soweto uprising and Biko's death. The UN Security Council finally passed Resolution 418, implementing a mandatory arms embargo against South Africa. Stopping weapons sales was a start.
But the boycotts that really seemed to, well, get under the skin of the white establishment, the ones that hit them culturally, were the sports boycotts, weren't they?
Absolutely. Sport, especially rugby and cricket, was and still is almost like a religion for many white South Africans. It was deeply intertwined with their national identity and sense of belonging in the world. So isolation in sport resonated very deeply, perhaps more immediately than complex economic arguments for some. The International Table Tennis Federation actually broke ties quite early on, but the really big one, the incident that crystallized the issue for many, was the Basil Della Vera affair in 1968.
Ah, yes, the Della Vera affair. Tell us about that.
Well, Basil Della Vera was a hugely talented cricketer, born in South Africa but classified as colored. Because of apartheid, he could never play for the official South African national team, the Springboks. So he left the country, emigrated to England, and eventually qualified to play for the English national cricket team. Then, in 1968, the English Cricket Board selected him for the upcoming tour to South Africa. The apartheid government, under Prime Minister Vorster, reacted furiously and declared Della Vera persona non grata, effectively refusing him entry into the country of his birth because of his race. They demanded England drop him from the team.
And England.
To their credit, the English cricketing authorities refused to buckle under that pressure. They insisted Della Vera was selected on merit and canceled the entire tour when South Africa wouldn't relent.
That must have sent a huge message.
It was massive. It starkly showed the world that the South African government's racism extended even onto the international sporting stage, interfering with the affairs of other nations. It led directly to South Africa being barred from most international sporting competitions for decades, including the Olympics. This cultural isolation, being cut off from their sporting passions, was a constant nagging reminder to white South Africans of their country's pariah status. Sir Don Bradman, the Australian cricket legend, famously said Australia wouldn't play South Africa again until teams were chosen on merit without regard to race.
And this whole combination, the internal resistance, the growing global condemnation, the sports boycotts, the government viewed all of this through a very specific lens, didn't they? The Cold War lens.
They absolutely did. The National Party government framed all opposition, both internal and external, as part of a total onslaught. In their narrative, this was a coordinated attack orchestrated by international communism, using black liberation movements like the ANC as proxies, aiming to overthrow white rule and seize South Africa's strategic minerals and position.
So this total onslaught narrative justified their response.
Precisely. It justified what they called their total strategy. This meant extreme militarization of the state. The defense budget ballooned. It also meant launching aggressive military operations deep into neighboring countries. Angola, Mozambique, Botswana, Lesotho, Zambia, attacking ANC bases and supporting anti-communist rebel groups like UNITA in Angola and Renamo in Mozambique. This constant external military focus, essentially fighting undeclared wars across southern Africa, became incredibly costly, both in terms of money and lives, and eventually contributed significantly to the government's exhaustion and realization that the situation was unsustainable.
Which brings us, finally, towards the tipping point. The immense cost of this total strategy, combined with the unending internal unrest and sanctions, eventually forced a change, didn't it? Starting, albeit tentatively, under P.W. Botha. He had that famous phrase, didn't he? Adapt or die.
That's right. P.W. Botha, who came to power in the late 70s, recognized that something had to change, but he was fundamentally unwilling to dismantle the core of grand apartheid white political control. He attempted what some called reform, but it was more like damage control. His major initiative was the introduction of the tricameral parliament in 1983. This created separate parliamentary chambers for white, colored, and Indian representatives, but crucially, it completely excluded the black majority, who made up over 70% of the population. So it was seen as just entrenching the exclusion of the majority.
Exactly. It was widely rejected, both internally by black South Africans and their allies, and internationally. It was seen as a cynical ploy to co-opt the colored and Indian minorities while locking black people out permanently. Botha did also repeal some of the more visible, embarrassing, petty apartheid laws like the Mixed Marriages Act and the Immorality Act, and significantly, the hated past laws were formally repealed between 1986 and 1988. But somewhat ironically, these partial reforms didn't ease the tension at all. In fact, they seemed to intensify the violence and instability in many areas.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would repealing the past laws actually increase violence?
Well, think about it. The past laws, however horrific, were a mechanism of physical control over black movement and residence in urban areas. When the government removed that specific control mechanism, the need to carry the DOMPUS, they didn't simultaneously grant the associated rights, like the right to vote or adequate housing or political inclusion in the cities where people were now freer to move. So it kind of created a vacuum. It destabilized the townships further, fueled competition for scarce resources, and intensified clashes between different political factions and between residents and the security forces who still brutally policed the townships. People also saw it as a sign that the government was weakening, feeling the pressure, but still refusing to yield genuine power or negotiate meaningfully with the recognized leaders of the black majority, particularly the ANC, which the government still insisted must renounce violence before any talks could begin. It led to a dangerous political standstill.
Right. The actual decisive shift, the one that broke the deadlock, finally came with Botha's successor, F.W. de Klerk, in 1990.
Yes. It was quite stunning, really. On the 2nd of February 1990, F.W. de Klerk stood up in Parliament and made an astonishing announcement. He declared the unbanning of the ANC, the PS, the South African Communist Party, and other liberation movements. He also announced the imminent release of political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela.
And Mandela was released just days later.
Just 9 days later. On the 11th of February 1990, after 27 long years in prison, Nelson Mandela walked free. It was an electrifying moment, watched by the entire world. And over the next year or so, the core legislative pillars of apartheid, the Group Areas Act, the Population Registration Act, the Land Acts, were formally repealed by Parliament. The system was being dismantled, legally at least.
But that period, the next 4 years leading up to the first democratic election, it was far from smooth, wasn't it? It was defined by incredibly difficult negotiations, the CODESA talks, but also fraught with intense political violence.
Absolutely. The path from Mandela's release to the 1994 election was incredibly precarious. The negotiations themselves, under the banner of CODESA, Convention for Democratic South Africa, were complex and often stalled. Simultaneously, there was horrific political violence raging in parts of the country, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and around Johannesburg. Much of it involved intense rivalry and clashes between supporters of the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Party, IFP, led by Mangosuthu Buthelezi. There were terrible massacres, like the Boipatong massacre in 1992, where IFP hostile dwellers attacked residents, killing dozens. This violence was often suspected of being fueled or at least tolerated by elements within the state security forces, the so-called Third Force, aiming to destabilize the transition.
And the whole negotiation process nearly collapsed entirely at one point, didn't it? After the assassination of Chris Hani in 1993.
That was an absolute breaking point, yes. Chris Hani was the leader of the South African Communist Party and a former chief of staff of the ANC's armed wing, MK. He was incredibly popular, especially among the youth and the more radical elements of the liberation movement. When he was assassinated by a white right-wing extremist in April 1993, the country stayed on the brink of civil war. Anger erupted everywhere. Many feared it was the spark that would ignite widespread conflict.
It must have been terrifyingly close.
It really was. And it's widely acknowledged that it was Nelson Mandela's intervention, his calm, powerful, televised address to the nation, appealing for peace and restraint in the immediate aftermath of Hani's death, that pulled South Africa back from the abyss. It showed his immense moral authority and leadership, and it actually pushed the negotiating parties back to the table with renewed urgency, realizing they had to reach a settlement to avoid catastrophe. Despite all that violence and tension, Mandela and de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize later that year, in 1993, specifically for their efforts in steering the country through that perilous transition and getting the negotiation process back on track.
And that whole tortured process finally culminated in the Democratic Dawn, didn't it? On the 27th of April, 1994.
That's the date. The first non-racial democratic elections were held. Long queues snaked across the country as millions of South Africans, the vast majority voting for the first time in their lives, cast their ballots. It marked the definitive end of centuries of white minority rule and the formal installation of a new democratic government. The ANC won a landslide victory, securing 62.65% of the vote, and Nelson Mandela became the first president of a free South Africa.
It's an incredible story of political transformation, but when we look at the legacy today, the political victory is undeniable. But those deep economic shadows of apartheid, they still linger incredibly powerfully, don't they?
They absolutely do. And that's perhaps the crucial so what for you, the listener, to take away from this. The deep economic stratification that was so deliberately engineered by policies like the Group Areas Act, the Bantustan system, Bantu education, that hasn't simply disappeared with the change in political power. In fact, according to metrics like the Gini coefficient, South Africa is currently ranked as the most economically unequal country in the world, or certainly among the very top.
The most unequal.
Still, yes. And the sources, the data, they consistently show that while political freedom was achieved a monumental achievement, no doubt the vast majority of the Black population has yet to experience a fundamental shift in their economic class or material circumstances since 1994. Wealth, land ownership, access to quality education and healthcare, these remain heavily skewed along racial lines inherited directly from the apartheid era. The challenge of addressing this deeply entrenched, generationally defined poverty and inequality remains arguably the ultimate ongoing test for post-apartheid South Africa.
So this deep dive, it's really shown us the sheer legislative tenacity, the bureaucratic effort required to build such a system of institutional discrimination, and equally the incredibly violent, complex, and prolonged effort needed both internally and externally to finally dismantle it.
Precisely. And what's truly significant, I think, looking beyond South Africa itself, is how that specific experience permanently redefine how the world thinks about and talks about institutional discrimination. The term apartheid itself is no longer just a historical descriptor for South Africa. It has been formally adopted into international law. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court lists the crime of apartheid as a specific crime against humanity.
So it's a legal term now internationally.
Yes. And beyond the strict legal definition, you see the concept, the word apartheid, being applied much more broadly in political commentary and analysis globally today. People talk about economic apartheid, educational apartheid, technological apartheid, even social apartheid, to describe situations of severe systemic segregation and inequality in various contexts around the world. It shows that the South African experience, tragically, provided the benchmark, the ultimate example of how institutionalized separateness could be constructed and enforced. So perhaps a final thought for you to consider is, where else in the world today might this concept of apartheid, this deliberate systemic creation of separate and unequal realities, still be relevant? Where else might we need to apply that lens?
That is a profound and, frankly, quite sobering thought to leave us with. Thank you so much for guiding us through this absolutely critical, though difficult, history.
It's always essential to remember and understand. My pleasure.
We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you believe your digital identity stops and starts with the username you pick and the password you inevitably forget, well, you are missing the most fundamental truth of the modern web. That simple login is only the greeting card. The actual conversation systems have about you is far, far more detailed.
It absolutely is. Our sources confirm that digital identity is, well, it's the essential comprehensive data structure stored on computer systems. It represents you or, any external agent. Could be an individual, a massive organization, even a smart device.
Right.
It's really the foundational component that confirms who you are, manages your access to digital services, and dictates how different parties can interact with you online.
And our mission today is to give you the blueprint of that invisible self. Because from the moment you send your first email or click your first link, you start generating what our research calls your data double.
Ah, yes, the data double. This is the intriguing and sometimes, frankly, unsettling cornerstone of the entire system.
Definitely unsettling.
The data double, often called a digital twin or virtual twin, isn't just your profile picture. It's the whole entity, built from every single scattered digital footprint you've left behind.
Like what exactly?
Oh, search histories, purchase receipts, location data, everything from your date of birth, maybe even to your hashed SSN. It's comprehensive.
And here's the crucial tension we need to track today. That data double is used for observation and highly personalized, targeted experiences.
Huge convenience, yeah.
But you sacrifice immense control to power it. That's the trade-off.
It really is. It's the engine of the modern internet, like it or not.
Okay, so let's unpack the anatomy of that data double then. It's not just a flat list of facts, right? It's built on different layers.
Yeah.
Some fixed, some highly volatile.
Exactly. Our sources define 3 core layers, and they help us understand how quickly that data double can, well, change. We can start with the most changeable pieces, the attributes. Think of these as facts that might change pretty often. Your current bank balance, maybe your medical history details, your physical address, or what you bought last week.
Dynamic stuff.
Very dynamic, frequently updated.
Then we move to preferences. These are your conscious choices, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. They change slower than attributes, but they're still fluid. Your favorite brand of running shoes, the font size you like on a website, or the currency you prefer for transactions.
Your choices.
Your ongoing choices, yes.
And finally, the foundational layer.
The traits. These are the inherent features, the data that's slow changing or basically fixed. Think legal identity stuff. Eye color, nationality, place of birth, legal name.
Okay.
It's like applying for a passport.
Yeah.
The attributes are where you live now, the traits are where you were born.
That makes sense. What I find fascinating, though, is that traditional security relied so heavily on those traits and maybe some attributes like a fixed password or an SSN.
Right.
But the real shift in identity verification, according to our sources, is moving toward a dynamic entity relationship derived from our actual behavior across loads of sites and apps.
Yes, because relying only on static identifiers is just too risky. They get stolen.
All the time.
The critical advancement is that the system doesn't just ask what you know, like the password. It asks how you behave. It compares a new event, say a login, or a big purchase against your established digital footprint.
So the system checks the new access attempt against my usual habits. If this new attempt lines up perfectly with known behavior, maybe logging in at the same time, same device, after looking at the same news sites.
They call that convergence. It means it's probably you. It aligns.
Okay. But if the system spots divergence, a new event that masks or, contradicts previous patterns, like a big purchase from a new city, new OS, using an old password.
That's a massive red flag. Exactly. And this dynamic behavioral comparison approach, it's incredibly accurate. Research cites authentication success rates up to 95%.
95%, that's high. But doesn't that accuracy rely on tracking my behavior constantly? Seems like a steep price for security.
That is the trade-off, no question. However, this level of behavioral tracking needs specific technical wrappers to manage the data securely. Which brings us to unique digital identifiers.
The strings or tokens linking it all.
Precisely. And they are classified based on how they're used, which is vital for security and privacy.
Okay, walk us through those classifications. Why do they matter for how information flows?
So there are 2 main distinctions. First, scope. Is the identifier omnidirectional, meaning public, easily discoverable, like a domain name or your public email address?
Okay.
Or is it unidirectional? Private, used only within the context of one specific identity relationship, like a temporary session token for just one online banking transaction.
Got it. Public versus private use. And the second distinction?
That relates to interpretation. Is the identifier resolvable? This means it can be instantly dereferenced into the specific entity it represents. Think an IP address pointing directly to a server or an email linking to a specific mailbox.
Makes sense.
Or is it non-resolvable? This is more abstract, like your real name, or maybe a hash token. It can only be compared to other data for equivalence. It doesn't resolve to a machine-readable thing on its own.
And why is that crucial?
Because an attacker can't just use a non-resolvable identifier to jump directly to your information. It adds a layer of obscurity.
Okay, so this whole structure, it seems like it's fundamentally built on trust, right? For my dynamic identity to work, someone has to trust the claims I'm making.
Precisely. Digital identity is fundamentally a mutually agreed relationship. The system, or the attributing party, has to trust that the claim, be it your confirmed age or your account role, is correct and actually associated with the entity presenting it.
Which takes us to the technical pillars holding that trust up: authentication and authorization.
Right. We hear these words a lot, but they have really distinct jobs.
Authentication is step one, proving who you are. It's the assurance of identity.
And authorization comes after identity is verified. It determines what resources that authenticated entity can actually access. Authorization depends completely on successful authentication.
So, like in a university database example.
Yeah, a professor gets authenticated, proves they are who they say they are.
Right.
But they might only be authorized to view student grades, not, say, modify the course curriculum itself.
Gotcha. And when we talk about robust authentication today, we've moved way past just username and password.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking multi-factor authentication, MFA, combining static identifiers with unique personal attribute, the biometric stuff.
Yeah, fingerprints, iris scans, maybe voice recognition, combining something you know, like a password, with something you are, like a fingerprint. That's the current gold standard for security.
But for real-time security, the most sophisticated tool seems to be risk-based authentication, or RBA.
Yes, RBA. This is where that dynamic identity model we talked about really shines. RBA doesn't just check the password. It evaluates multiple simultaneous entity relationships in real time.
So it's not just looking at the login box, it's checking my device's operating system, the DNS server I'm using, maybe the speed I type at, and correlating all that complex info against my known behavioral events in milliseconds.
Exactly. RBA calculates a transaction risk score. Let's use a clear example. Imagine you usually log into your trading platform every weekday morning, 9:05 a.m., specific corporate network, New York, Chrome browser.
My routine.
Right.
Yeah.
Then suddenly, a login attempt happens at 3 a.m. Sunday morning using the Tor browser from a mobile device in, say, Vietnam.
Okay, alarm bells.
Big time. Even if the password is correct, the RBA flags the massive divergence in OS, locale, transaction velocity, timing, all of it.
And that transaction risk score immediately spikes, triggering maybe extra MFA challenges or just blocking access altogether.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very effective defense against stolen credentials,
Yeah.
but again, you see the pattern. It's built on constant surveillance of our digital lives.
Yeah, there's that trade-off again.
And to formalize these trust relationships, especially in business, digital identities are often officially issued through digital certificates. These certificates contain validated user data, often backed by legal guarantees from recognized certification authorities. It moves the transaction beyond just an agreement into, well, legal certainty.
Which brings us right to the societal dimension. Why are businesses so deeply invested in perfecting this data double? We mentioned convenience, but ultimately it's about control and, let's be honest, monetization.
That's the core conflict, isn't it? Corporations thrive by tailoring their services. Personalized ads, fine-tuned search results, purchase suggestions.
All that stuff.
Their success relies entirely on connecting attributes and preferences back to a specific, authenticated digital identity. The better they know you, the more revenue they can potentially generate.
But the pendulum seems to be swinging back a bit. The research we looked at highlights a pretty big trend. Users increasingly choosing to pay for online content via subscriptions.
Right. Literally paying money.
To move away from exchanging their personal data for free access.
Yeah.
Feels like a direct economic response to privacy concerns.
It absolutely is. And the public demand is translating into legal concepts. Which leads us to one of the most critical legal ideas being debated globally right now.
Yeah.
The right to informational self-determination.
That sounds dense, but it sounds really important.
It is. Legal scholars argue that current data protection rules, while needed, often just focus on protecting the information itself, the data point.
Not the person.
Exactly. Not protecting the individual from the consequences of that data being used, aggregated, interpreted, maybe misinterpreted.
Meaning we're losing control over our digital presence and maybe our personal autonomy because the data double is making decisions for us we didn't agree to or don't even know about.
That's the argument. Proponents say informational self-determination is essential for human autonomy. It gives individuals real control over collection, use, dissemination of their data. It's the legal fight to manage your digital self so it lines up with your real-world self and isn't misused.
And the biggest global attempt to codify this tension so far has been the EU's GDPR, right? General Data Protection Regulation 2018.
GDPR definitely changed the game, massively. It applies worldwide to any company handling personal data of EU citizens.
Wow, worldwide.
If they handle EU data, yes. It forces transparency about data management. Critically, it gives EU citizens rights like the right to be forgotten, data portability, deletion requests. It imposed a huge compliance burden globally just by raising the bar for personal data control.
Okay, while we're on identity and law, we have to touch on the inevitable end of a digital life. Digital death.
It's a profound ethical and technical challenge.
Right.
When someone passes away, their active internet accounts just remain,
Yeah.
leading to automated, sometimes upsetting situations like birthday reminders for the deceased from social media. Platforms have been forced to react.
Companies like Facebook, now Meta, they offer specific options, don't they?
They do. Either memorialization freezes the profile, allows friends to share memories, or the option for authorized descendants or executors to request full removal of everything, messages, photos, all activity.
A necessary step.
It's a recognition that our digital identities really do extend beyond our physical existence now.
Okay, shifting from the individual to the global scale. Digital identity is also critical for commerce and governance. The financial world, particularly after the 2008 crisis, needed a global uniform identifier.
Which led to the creation of the Legal Entity Identifier, or LEI.
The LEI.
Yeah, a 20-digit alphanumeric ISO standard code designed to provide a permanent, globally recognized ID for legal entities and transactions. Decentralized, validated, brings transparency to global financial markets.
So that's like an omnidirectional resolvable identifier, but for organizations.
Precisely.
Meanwhile, governments are rapidly building or expanding national digital ID systems, streamlining services, validating physical documents.
Absolutely. We see huge initiatives globally. Systems like India's Aadhaar, unique ID for over 1 billion residents.
Incredible scale.
Estonia's digital card lets citizens vote, access medical records, do business completely digitally. And Ukraine's Daya app, which has actually legalized digital passports, same standing as physical ones.
And in the U.S., it's more decentralized, but there are efforts.
Yeah, proposed federal legislation like H.R. 4258 and S. 4528 aims for a unified, government-wide approach, starting with things like driver's licenses, birth certificates, and state pilots, like Colorado's My Colorado app, have been accepting digital IDs for some transactions since 2019.
Right.
And let's not forget the EU. They recently adopted Regulation 2024-1183, creating the European Digital Identity Framework. Includes the big one, the EU Digital Identity Wallet, a massive push for identity portability and security across the continent.
Okay, so all these modern systems, they seem to rely heavily on something called networked identity, using compound trust relationships.
Yes, and this enables probably the most crucial privacy feature of modern identity management: selective disclosure.
Selective disclosure sounds technical, but important.
Very. The analogy makes it clearer. Imagine booking a hire car. Traditionally, you hand over your driver's license, full name, birth date, address, picture way more info than the car company actually needs. Selective disclosure changes that. In a networked identity system, your driving agency could electronically vouch only for your age and qualification status. Your bank could assert only your required banking details.
So the rental company never gets my name or address or date of birth.
Exactly. You share only the necessary proof points for that specific transaction. You maintain complete privacy over the rest of your sensitive identity file.
That sounds like the ideal balance: convenience and control.
That's the goal, yes.
Okay, so to recap what we've deep dived into today, we are all generating this incredibly detailed, dynamic data double. It powers the personalization we enjoy, maybe even rely on. But its existence is forcing a huge legal battle for informational self-determination, and it's driving the adoption of highly sophisticated and highly tracked authentication methods like RBA.
We've moved so far beyond just the password. We're in a world where our behavioral patterns, the convergence or divergence of our digital habits, are becoming the most trusted form of verification.
Okay, here's the final provocative thought for you to carry forward. As global reliance on digital identity systems accelerates, the discussion isn't just about protecting data anymore. It's shifting towards whether this digital self, this data double, should be granted some kind of legal standing.
Interesting.
Maybe even enshrined as a new form of human right, giving us the absolute right to control its evolution and its application. So what does it mean for you if your digital representation holds actual legal status? And how much control are you willing to fight for over that crucial entity?